organizer, Thilina, here. So,
just be careful on the tripod.
so Thilina is an assistant professor at the ELSI, Earth Life Science Institute in Tokyo, and his PhD is on astronomy and science communication. So his current research is on standards for life detection discoveries and evaluation of research engagement at universities. So he teaches science communication and astronomy for graduate students. So I'm always impressed by his article or talk about this decolonizing space science or astronomy. So I'm really excited to listen to your talk. So Thilina, please go ahead.
Hi everyone. So it's nice as an organizer to actually speak. Time to time, all of us can. Mike has given and myself, we have given talks in the past, but we haven't done that in a while, except for Michael, once you graduated. So yeah, and so today's topic is actually quite interesting. Okay. But let me give you a quick background of what I do right now. So I am actually, my expertise in two different areas, astronomy and science communication. But over last probably like 6-7 years, I changed how I am involved in astronomy. Like if you talk to anyone like Harrison here who gave a talk in the past, is an astrobiologist, and people that you do usually research. But the way I do research in astronomy is a bit different. Of course, difficult, but different. So I come from observation astronomy, which means you need to have access to telescopes to observe. And I also come from Sri Lanka. And so growing up in Sri Lanka, we don't really have any opportunities to do these things, right? So because if you look at all the big telescopes, they are funded by top leading countries with money, countries with interest in science and so on. And which also means the kind of developing countries and kind of underdeveloped countries, these two categories, you don't have access to big facilities. So how do we actually overcome this? You need to have a way that allow policy changes to allow people who are working in developing these developed countries to give access to people in developing countries. So that's where I came in. When I was before moving to Japan, I lived in Netherlands. And I worked in Netherlands, England, and Portugal. So what I did was, there's a observatory called European Southern Observatory, and but this is not one telescope. This is like multiple telescopes around the world. And then there's another facility called Las Cumbres Observatory, which also many telescopes around the world. So imagine them as like two different telescope networks. So I am lucky enough to have access to these two telescope facilities, telescope time. And since about 6 years ago, I only work with students and researchers from developing countries. So after 6-7 years later, I have no collaborators in like developed world at all. And what do? We observe spectrography of exoplanets. And also we measure distance between stars and orbital calculation of stars and double stars. So these are mostly for master's students and PhD students. And so without these students from I have a group in Sri Lanka, I have a group in Nepal, Bangladesh, and Kenya. So we started 6 years ago with 5-6 students, and all of them were from Sri Lanka. And right now, all 6 students are in PhD programs in astronomy, so I'm really proud of that. And then right now we have about 35 students around the world, and so it's fun doing these things, that opportunity that I didn't have, now these students have. And then I do science communication. I am mostly focused on how big universities and research institutes, how do they communicate science with society. and why should they communicate, and also researchers, and then also I teach, and the other subject I've been working on is decolonizing science, and specifically in astronomy. What is decolonizing? We'll get to that later. So we all, I'm sure any given point, everyone has either picked up a science fiction book, or have watched a science fiction TV series or movie, and all of these sort of inspired us to, even as kids, and even the people who are scientists right now, to think about space exploration, right? And definitely, I was highly influenced by science fiction, because when I was a kid, this is me yesterday, but like I was 16, and I was lucky enough to be hanging out with Arthur C. Clarke, who passed away many years ago. And Arthur C. Clarke is one of the most prominent science fiction writers, so it was really cool to, as a teenager, to hang out with somebody who was looking forward, thinking about future space exploration. And he was such a big influence in my life. So all of these sort of lead into how, over the past 60 years, humans have looked into, I don't know if you guys can see the screen, I'm just gonna turn sometimes, from the Sputnik launch and all the way to the first human on space and the moon landing, the first this bigger space station, and then we went to Mars, and we have the space shuttle, and then we had the first space tourist and all that. So all of these are space exploration. So, and very exciting. Anytime we think about space exploration, going outside of Earth, exploring things, and learning more, uncovering things, expanding our knowledge. All of this is really exciting. And why do we do all these? And so we sort of have, in terms of science, we sort of think of, are we alone? And how did all of these, started? And why are we here? What's coming up next, technology-wise? But also, space exploration actually helps a lot with our daily life, like technology. Think about, wheelchairs are part of the wheelchairs is sort of like how one of the things came from this Apollo program, and a lot of the things in medical science is also from Apollo era, and the fire alarm at your house, that's also part of Apollo program, because these were really sort of like primitive way of doing technology back then, and you needed ways to have these fire alarms, and then that's what we have at home right now, which means I forgot to fix my fire alarm at home. I need to do that. So there's two levels of benefits for humans, us, and then benefits for science. And so there are a few scientists in this room, and most of them thinking about benefit for the science, and then pretty much everyone else also thinking about what's the benefit for the humans. As I said, there's so much of looking into origin of things and discovering new knowledge, and then how technology affects society. But we have been very excited for the longest period for space exploration, but then at some point people started also wondering, are these worlds out there, are these asteroids, moons, and other planets, are they actually for human use, or are they sort of like belong to themselves? And who are we to sort of decide what is what, and who owns rights to do things? And it's more of a philosophical question, even to ask among yourself. This is a great question to have a beer over, right? Because there's no right answer, there's no wrong answers, but there are many wrong answers. So when people started thinking about these and also realized, and one of the things actually we forget, that we are thinking about, earlier I was mentioning like the benefits for humans and benefits for science. But then there's a third benefit which most of us don't really think about. It's benefit for security, weapons, and sort of like military. And that's sort of the largest use of space exploration right now. And anything, when I say space exploration, anything beyond Earth, like out there. So in 1967, so late 90s, UK and Russia and USSR, not Russia, USSR and UK and USA came together, sort of thinking, and actually United Nations brought them together thinking, you all need to think about how you use space and how you actually explore space. So United Nations put together with a group of people something called Outer Space Treaty, and this is the first law outside of Earth. How do we actually engage outside of Earth? Anything before this, any Apollo missions and Sputnik and everything done without any law. Anyone could do anything at this point. And we didn't really think about space debris or what we left in the atmosphere or what we left on the moon. I mean, there's so much junk on the moon, like the Apollo whole mission left so many junk there. We have so much in the atmosphere as well. But this is the first time that law came into place, and this is sort of like the backbone of right now we know as space law. You might have heard there's a whole like university departments and people are studying space law, but this is the start of it. And so about 104, I think this is an open treaty that people can still join, and about 100 something countries joined so far. And so the main idea of the space treaty is that space is for everybody, but you can't claim anything in space. But did it really work? So at this point I kind of want to step back. This is a very popular artwork depicting colonization in Sri Lanka. So I will sort of go through a little bit of why this space exploration and colonization sort of work hand on hand right now and how they're related. But before we move forward, I'm gonna go a little off the rail and touch base on a little bit about colonization. So maybe some of you are from a country that was colonized, or you are from a country that you were the colonizer. Either way, just to refresh your mind, so colonization is where sort of like a party, it could be like a group of people or a community or a country itself, and they sort of go into another area or another place and sort of turn that into a way that you can gain a lot of economically and sort of change the culture and sort of social behavior and impose a lot of things. And this is sort of like colonization. And then decolonizing is where that party who colonized leave that the second party saying from now onwards you're on your own and you have your freedom to make the decision and so on, and sort of like pull back. And so far we still have about 20-30 territories that are still under colonization right now. And the recent I think the recent independence was about 2 years ago. And but a lot of the people, so the idea of, once you say, okay, we are done with colonization, we are leaving, you're on your own, but then that sort of start the post-colonialism time for everyone else in that country or the region. It doesn't mean they are going to actually live happily ever after, because the Western sort of colonizer left, so we are free to do whatever you want. It doesn't really work like that, because I'll come back to this. Post-colonial time, when you get the freedom, it actually leaves a lot of problem with how hierarchy works, and then how the class system works, and then how sort of like elitism works. And most of these never really existed in these countries. And globalization that we all sort of discuss is right now in many different fields is part of how post-colonialism came into play. And one good example, when I was in Sri Lanka, I was living in Sri Lanka until high school, and that's time you start thinking about SATs. And I remember the first time I took a SAT book, and I was thinking, oh my god, none of these things on the SAT book is actually in our curriculum, that we can't really write them, because the certain exams and certain standards are set up as globalization, but looking at only a very small sector. So education systems, right now we have standards, and even Japanese universities spend so much money to get their rankings high, because we have a global ranking system, and Japanese universities are actually not doing really well. But who are we competing with? Somebody out there, someone actually decided this is the standard, and this is how everyone else have to compete for. And whoever set up the standard usually are at the top, because they set up the standard in that way. So this cross for many different areas, like you take scientific journals, universities, and exams, whatever you sort of look into, there's always a globalized standards, but it's always set up by somebody who's already in a position to do it. So, but then there's the idea of giving an opportunity. The best example is, I'm sure everyone heard of Ceylon tea. If you're a tea drinker, Ceylon tea is from Sri Lanka. The best tea, I must say. And so one of the good example is that when the British left Sri Lanka, they said, you have the tea now, you can continue the tea business. And we also make the railway system, so you can easily transport tea all over the place. But it took Sri Lanka about 30 years to get that going, because the whole system was not set up in a way that actually the Sri Lanka could build a government and the education system and hire people and so on. And so the reversal of fortune doesn't work in the same way, where you say that we have done enough for you, you should be able to continue it. And so the countries, and as I studied, the countries that were really rich during the colonial time ended up being really poor, and then countries that were really because one other good example is like India has had the minus GDP during their colonization time. So from 1500 onwards, for the last 500 years, these countries are still struggling. And right, so that was just a very quick social lesson about colonization, just to refresh your memory. So has things really changed? Because we have heard so much about, we love space exploration, and there are many countries doing it, and we have looked into colonization. We know exactly what happened. Have we really learned the lesson, and to avoid running sort of like colonial actions? Well, not really. So this is European Space Agency, which is like JAXA, and it's the main one in Europe. So there are many like big space agencies. There's NASA, European Space Agency called ESA, and then there's JAXA, ISRO in India, and so on. And this was on the tagline of European Space Agency since the beginning: Europeans, once explorers, and always explorers. But this comes in a way that how Europe explored the world in the past, but their exploration was actually colonization. And so this was this kind of narrative was going on for the longest time. And one of my crown achievements in my life is to actually take this change, get the European Space Agency to change this tagline. And so, say in 2020 they changed it after there's a huge petition. But this idea of explorers, discoveries, and new worlds, and discovering new things, we are still looking in a sort of a filter of how colonizers worked. And what about most of these are done by policymakers, scientists, and so on. What about general public? Do they think that one country or one party should sort of lead the space technology, space exploration? In fact, so this was actually this survey was done this year, where the research center, the Pew Research Center, basically asked from Americans, should Americans be leading the space technology, space exploration, like they used to do in the 60s, and about 69% of the people said yes. And this is really helpful for space tech companies mostly to get certain bills passed and to change things. And this did actually made a huge difference. I'll get to that later. So right now we do know everyone is really excited about space exploration. We also know there's a little bit of colonial aspect of space exploration. But are we really doing anything to change it? How are we sort of looking into this? So right now, we are really, I would say next 50 years is going to be really exciting for most of the scientific field related to like origin of life, astrobiology, because a lot of missions are going into these different planets and different areas. And it's also very exciting as technology, because we are trying to increase the change of technology at a speed to keep up with these needs we have. And private companies has come into play a major role. So that will sort of help to speed up things. So, and in the past, if we go back about 40, 50 years, most of the space exploration done by government, and all the 100% of the money is government funded. But right now, it's actually not. It's if you take a JAXA mission, a lot of the equipments are built by Mitsubishi, Toyota, Nissan, and like major companies, and they have had these contracts for many years. And also Japan, it's a bit harder to cancel contracts because Japan, very traditional way of keeping contract. And so in the next, I don't know if you can see, next 10 years, we are spending so much money on like human space flight and moon exploration, and then a little bit more on Mars and so on. And this means there's also opportunity for space companies. So we are doing a lot of science. Just think of all this as science. And then there's also people like Elon Musk doing Starlink programs. And right now, as of 2023 November, there's about 5,000 small satellites going on. and eventually it will have about more than 40,000 satellites. And there was a study to actually model all these satellites, how these would look eventually. And at some point, we would actually see more satellites than stars, which is really sad, especially for not just for scientists to do science, but for next generations, looking at the sky. We won't be able to look at the sky. I mean, I don't know if you guys saw walking in today, there's Moon and Jupiter visible, right, very close to each other. And so we will lose the natural resource that everyone, you can enjoy and inspire, also write things, poems and movies and whatever. But putting on all this technology in the space means that every single mission creates also debris. But one of the largest actually debris are not from scientific missions. They're actually from testing missiles. Many countries test missiles in the low Earth orbit, and which is where basically all of these Elon Musk, the Starlink satellites, they're pretty much in the low Earth orbits. And one of the reasons they are putting out so many satellites is when these communication satellites are really close to Earth, you need more together to communicate with each other. But they are really fast in terms of communicating. And so the amount of space debris has increased exponentially within last 50 years. But why? I mean, you could ask why, because we have a lot of regulations. There's a great patch of garbage on Pacific Ocean, right? Pacific Ocean, yeah. And we do have a lot of laws. We have I think nobody litter in Japan, but I'm sure there's a law somewhere that you cannot litter. I don't know. And but certain like Singapore, you can't litter. You'll get fined, right? And so we do have certain ways of putting out fines and regulations and so on. But why are we still putting out creating this garbage in space, and who's actually monitoring how many space missions can be allocated and so on? That's a very interesting question. Do we have any laws at all in space? So we are going into this era of sample written missions, which is really exciting. I mean, I personally really like it because you get to see samples from asteroids and moon and whatever the other worlds that we are going to, especially now next would be Mars. So at some point for the last basically 40-50 years, we have had so many missions that brought back some sort of samples, and it's only going to increase in the next couple of years. But as I said, there's not so much regulations related to these kind of missions. So in the beginning, I mentioned about this outer space treaty, and since then there's been other 4 treaties, and these are all global treaties, mostly led by United Nations, and a lot of countries actually signed these treaties. But there are certain countries who hasn't signed these treaties, like USA, and but there's a big reason for that. So if you look at the dates of these treaties, they're really old, from 60s to 80s, right? And which also means that right now, if you look at these treaties, there's a lot of loopholes because lawyers are much smarter, and we have much more, people spend so much money on lawyers. So in 2015, something radically changed. US passed a law. It's called Space Act of 2015, and this happened during Obama administration. And what did this change how companies and everyone look at space exploration? So in the Outer Space Treaty, the idea is that nobody can own anything in the space, but everyone can explore it. You can learn about it, you can study it, so on, but you cannot claim the ownership. But US came into place and they sort of passed a bill that allows private companies to explore any object in the universe outside of Earth, and wherever you are exploring, let's say you set up a base, and that territory, anything in that territory, you own it. And the same law from whatever, the housing, if you have a property in US, that property law is applicable in that whatever the object, which is like the moon or the Mars. So let's say Harrison actually set up a really cool space tech company, and then went to moon and set up a base. And then Harrison has the right to claim to that area, saying this is actually my base, and I can do whatever I need in this area. So this changed for so many companies how they look at space mining, how they look at actually resources in space. But this is in terms of the global space treaty that came in the 60s, this is completely illegal. But can we do anything about it? Well, it's a bit tricky thing because US is currently leading, doing the space exploration, but also more than 50% of the US space missions are given to private companies, and that's sort of how you get a lot of money from the private companies as well. So basically, US decided that they retreat from all the previous space treaties and look at use the one they passed. And for everyone else, this was a problem. So no other country supported this. But then they later came up with a much bigger plan that everyone sort of had to support, which is actually really interesting. So this is the biggest mission right now. Surprisingly, I don't know, does anyone heard of Artemis at all? I'm just curious. Yeah. So Artemis is the biggest space mission right now. For some reason, I don't know why it's not famous enough, because it's supposed to be bigger, like Apollo mission level. And this is a really long-term mission where the first phase of the mission, the spacecraft will go into space, around the moon, somewhere close to moon. And the next phase, people will go to moon. And this is the first time people will land on moon since the 60s. And then set up a base on moon and use that base to go to Mars. So this is a really long-term mission, and it's a big budget mission. And but somehow it's not really famous, which is, maybe people lost interest in space exploration. But
I think it was renamed between presidential administration.
Yeah, that's also happened. So, and so interestingly, space policy is not my expertise at all, but it's really interesting how policies in science actually, thinking long term. So 2015, anyhow, any space mission, usually from the day it starts, the planning begins sometimes 10 years earlier, right? So 2015, they passed the bill that any American company can claim the ownership of the area that they are going to work on. Like it can be moon or any kind of celestial object. And then this mission comes into play, and there's most of the contracts in this mission, like certain instruments and part of the missions, are done by companies. So the companies are really interested in Artemis mission because they get to actually explore different worlds, and especially you can start mining the moon. So scientifically, it's a really interesting project because you get to set up a space sort of a station in moon, and then you get to sort of commercialize human going into space, and we'll have a new really cool spacecraft called Orion, since the space shuttle is defunct now. But all of these happened, and I mean, these lawyers are amazing. They should make a TV series out of this. So NASA and basically the Senate and the NASA together came out with something called Artemis Accords. This is a great holiday reading. It's not that long. If you're interested, I encourage you to read this. It's a policy document, but it's a really good Christmas reading. So the Artemis Accords is a way to sort of look at what it means to do space exploration right now. And this sort of overpower whatever the treaty, like the Outer Space Treaty that everyone, like 140 something countries, signed in the past. And but it's done in a very interesting way, where in between lines it says, if you don't sign the treaty, you cannot explore moon or Mars. So Russia didn't sign it, and China didn't sign it, and eventually India sort of, I would say, bullied into signing. And also the difference is space agencies can't sign this, as only a country can sign it. So the president of the country can decide whether they are on board or not. And these are actually signed from the bilateral grants, not grants, too many grants in my mind, bilateral agreements between the countries. So there's a lot of pressure to join these accords, and slowly few countries are, I think 33 countries have signed so far, and so European Union hasn't come on board, but US has bilateral agreements between most countries, and they are individually coming into play. So in summary, this Artemis Accords has a huge problem, and one of them is that it says basically that no one else can do the lunar exploration if you're not part of this program, but in a very nice way, like beautifully written, not like directly, because it's not from Netherlands. And so, which is interesting, but India has and China has a lot of plans with moon, and they were one of the last two countries that went to moon recently, and also some of their missions were really successful. So they didn't want to. They haven't signed it, China and Russia, they haven't signed it because this is while I was reading, I was thinking about how colonizers used to do things, where you go into a country or a territory and say, we are going to govern in a certain way, and you need to agree for this. If you don't agree, then you're not allowed to do this and this and this. So it's a very colonial way of doing things, but 50 years later, since the last series of independence that we received. So it's been 500 years since the first sort of colonial times, and we are still seeing that how these colonial approaches in space exploration. And the lot of these are, I work at a research institute, but we don't really care about these things because we are doing science. And as long as we get to do science, we don't really care about how things behind the doors in science works, how the money gets involved, who uses money, how these are allocated, and so on. And all we sort of care about is once the mission is there, when we get the data, let's look at the data. That's all we sort of care about as scientists. So, but as humans, as people from Earth, these are really important how we are going forward. So one of the biggest problems right now is that there's no laws who get to go to space and who get to explore what and what can you bring back. And even recently, JAXA had a mission called Hyperza 2 where we brought back some samples from an asteroid. But do we really have the right to do that? What if a difference imagine for a second there was some much intelligent it's really easy to be much intelligent than humans, but imagine there's a much intelligent beings and came to Earth and sort of grabbed some stuff from Earth. Are there any laws that prevent that? And we haven't really thought about who has the right and how to protect these things. And right now it's pretty much open, and even the treaties that were sort of passed in the 60s are completely overpowered by actions like in the US. And so what's interesting is all of these, we are usually looking at it as a progress of science, advancement of science. But in reality, it's mostly the power and profit. Because everything we get to do science, before that there's a lot more involved, the equipment, the technology, and the power. And so it's basically how the Western colonial powers used in the 500 years ago, and they're still being sort of like the acting in the same way. And we don't have any guidelines for these because we have some very vague guidelines from the 60s, but we haven't actually agreed. And right now it's really hard to pass a global treaty like in the 60s because countries don't really want to sign things. And so it's interesting that I find it I'm in such a dilemma where I belong to a scientific research institute where we are focused on science, but very hardly these scientific research institutions around the world are looking into how the science is being done and who's actually profiting from it. And exploration has sort of become a term that it has created this hierarchy and among societies, and in the sense like if we are going to the moon, either we are with us or not with us, and if you are not with us, you don't get to explore at all. And it's such a Western view of looking at things, and this has been this is an ongoing problem, and this is why that we really need to sort of look into how we need to decolonize these things away, moving away from colonial approach. So I think even as a science, like those who are in the science industry here, it's our duty to sort of look into as scientists what's our responsibility on all these. And as citizens, and what's your responsibility, how do we sort of support the governments who are sort of going through the avenue of profiting off these? And how do we sort of convince our governments to change? And there are very few companies right now who are working on changing things. But these are not companies; these are initiatives. But most of these are set up by scientists themselves, like people who started questioning things and sort of wondering why are we heading in this direction, ended up actually setting up this. One of the famous one is Space Enabled at MIT Media Lab, and Outer Space Institute and the Secure World Foundation is also looking into how we can sort of set up new treaties to protect outer space and to make it more even, so we can still explore and we can still advance science, we can learn things, but we do it in a way that we are actually not colonizing in the same way that we used to do 500 years ago. And also to make it even, to give the opportunity for everyone around the world to get involved and be part of it. So I think one of the takeaways, this is a topic ongoing, and it's more of a discussion, and more of a scientific discussion or also philosophical discussion. So please talk to among yourself, and because there's no clear guidelines right now. It's a completely open topic, and I think one of the things I was sort of pushed is to look at these Mars and moons and sites of not as a conquest or settlement, but more as a exploration that we do for more inclusively, and they are sort of, and we also need like really radical space laws and ethics that doesn't exist today. And I kind of want to stop there, but just to leave you with you guys, number of right now there are about 14 space agencies around the world, and there are smaller ones, but these are the bigger ones. And when I say bigger ones, this is a space agency that usually you can put about 50 million US dollars per mission. And then there are more than 500 space tech companies around the world. There's only been 4 space treaties so far globally, and there's only been 1 space treaty from US. And that 1 space treaty changed everything how it used to be in the past. And all of these 500 space companies, and then more than a dozen space agencies, including the one in Japan, JAXA, they are all functioning without any guidelines and laws outside of Earth. So that's a very interesting perspective to think about, like how are we doing science right now? We don't have laws and we don't have guidelines, but we are still going forward. So, okay, I'm gonna stop here. Happy to take some questions or to have a chat. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for the very, very interesting topic tonight. So you mentioned a lot about guidelines, and you mentioned a lot about colonization framework, right? So my question will be, what will be the ideal framework, or what will be the ideal guideline, and who should create those guidelines?
I actually don't know what's the ideal guidelines, because that's what we need to sort of work towards. But the best case scenario would be the United Nations has an outer space office, and they are sort of at the best position right now to make this happen. The problem is, same as United Nations Security, Security Council, where the these things depends on the president during that period. So right now the Security Council president is from Russia. That's why they couldn't pass a bill for Russian-Ukraine war. And for this, the Outer Space Office president is from US. And there's no, as long as this kind of behavior exists, it's kind of difficult, but they are sort of at the best place to bring everyone together. But unfortunately, we don't have an answer. Yeah, cheers.
So, good speech. I guess it's not really much of a question, but the biggest difference between colonizing in space, and I get colonizing bad. The difference with space versus like the 500 years on Earth is there's no people in space. Like there's no, like if we go to Mars, there's no living creatures on Mars. There's nothing living on the moon. It is a different ethics with like going into space because no one's there, other than some robots. But like, I don't know, the law thing is just a completely different situation due to the fact that there are no cities, there are no people living outside the space stations. It's very few people.
Yeah, but colonization is not about actually colonizing people itself. It can be a land or anywhere, because in the past, colonization had so many different land, and location was one of the major things, because 500 years ago, almost like space travel, because we use ships, and where the ships, and there was a distance that actually ships can go. And that's why Mauritius, Sri Lanka, Philippines, were, these islands were really important for stops. And these stops were not about people. These stops were about the location. And because there you need to stop, that's the maximum distance from Spain to African continent, and African continent, the Asian continent, the stop for Sri Lanka. So right now, similarly, to get to Mars, the moon is the stop. But these locations historically on Earth happen to have people, so we colonize people as well, get them to use. But almost like the space travel is exactly like how 500 years ago ships traveled, because right now space technology they're not traveling really fast, they are really slow, super slow.
Yeah.
Definitely different laws, but the concept is very similar.
No, I hear ya.
One question, it's more a general remark, but one of the questions is, well, we have the context of hoping for the fact that our countries and models is not projected through sphere of influence from powers on Earth, but there is also the possibility, and it's more a medium-term consequence, to have groups living of significant demographic size out there who want to become autonomous, especially if you consider possible genetic deviation due to long space exposure and so on. So how do you see the question of 200 years from now or 300 years from now, when people wanted to self-determinate in some remote colony out there, I would say? How?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's hard to say, because when I started, I said space exploration is really exciting. Even when I was a child, it was still exciting. Even now, it's really exciting. But the way things are going in reality is actually not really looking that good. Space exploration is going to create a huge division who has access to space. Right. I mean, it's almost like for me, it's kind of like having a passport from Sri Lanka. You can go to two countries. So I think it's going to restrict. So we always think about, we'll have a really cool, diversity of people, and we will sort of have a different colonies and so on. But can we actually do that right now? It doesn't allow at all. Even in the space accord, there are countries signed, but you cannot be an American astronaut. Like, I can't be an American astronaut. You need citizenship. So even in Japan, I can't be an astronaut. Any of the countries that has astronauts, you cannot be. You need citizenship. So there's a lot of restrictions. Who has access, and the other interesting thing is, this Artemis program, the first 4 astronauts, is more like a diversity check. There's going to be a Black American female astronaut, and then 1 white, and so on. They already selected 4 people, and that's what they are pushing, the whole image of, we are sending the first female African, to the moon, and so on. But this, yes, great, sure, excellent. But then how do you do that is actually a problem. So in reality, there's no such a thing as diversity in space at all, and I don't think it will happen the way things are going. So mostly we'll see a white colony, like a white people colony somewhere.
Yes, but with some possibility at some point of.
Yes, let's have some hope, because Christmas and holidays are on the corner. Yes, hopefully we'll have some, better. I would love to see that kind of ways, but the thing is, outside of Western countries, like as in global north, there's no space tech company existing to the point that can do that. All the big budget space tech companies are based on global north, including Japan. Japan, I don't know, what's it called, iSpace? Yes, iSpace. So iSpace did a amazing task. The mission failed, but to get to that point, to raise that money, it was such a huge effort, right? But where the money and where the access is are still in global north. So diversity wouldn't be the same as we think. Let's see, I don't know, maybe someone here can change it. Yeah.
I cannot change it, but I have a question.
Yeah, I was like, yes, I can.
No. So as you know, there's an international astronomy organization called IAU, International Astronomical Union. We normally stay out of like space exploration or space industry. Like, we basically treat aerospace engineer like totally perfection. But as you know, more and more these days, like there's a lot of like solar system missions. There, like Starlink reached the other pod. We start need to care about that. So I'm just wondering whether you think the IAU or organization like that would have any leverage, or maybe that would be one of the first things to start working on. Because from what my takeaway is that there's no good solution right now. There's not even a solution right now. And perhaps the conversation and continuous conversation is what the society actually need. We just need to keep reminding people that this is something people care about, right? So, and those organizations will have the ability to kind of like push the conversation kind of at least steadily over years, and to the point that people will start to agree on something.
Yeah, totally. So I'm from IAU. I'm a steering member. Unfortunately, this part cannot go online. We are recording, but unfortunately, the top management of IAU is still very Western and white. We are doing one for the Starlink. we do have a conversation directly with SpaceX to sort of set up certain guidelines and meet halfway. But in reality, there's no law for Starlink to say not do it. The only reason for Starlink, like the SpaceX, to meet us halfway is purely out of good. And good doesn't exist. So, IAU, like United Nations, is if you guys don't know, IAU is the Union for Astronomy, like United Nations. And IAU decides like a lot of important things, like Pluto is not a planet anymore. IAU decided, and we voted. So it's a union that make decisions, name all the objects, and pretty much have a lot of guidelines. It's really important. But then most of scientists or rather astronomers from US doesn't really care about IAU or so I think we think IAU has a power, but in reality actually power is power when it's applicable for a certain place, and when you can't do it, then it doesn't really has any power at all. And if you speak to anyone at NASA about IAU, they don't really care. It's like, are you talking about the club? But this is like a union with 10,000 astronomers around the world, and but IAU doesn't have the power and the money in the same way to push things, because we are separated from the government. Although I think so, IAU released when the Starlink happened, we released a statement. But I'm also these statements are like, somebody put out something on the website and whatever, nothing else. And so unfortunately I'm part of it as well, but I'm trying to find a way to how can we do better, and how can we sort of, I don't have an answer. The only reason I wanted to bring this topic up, which is a really happy year-ending topic, unfortunately, that we need more awareness of these things behind what's happening in science. And because we are talking about, all the time we are talking about amazing scientific results, but we don't really talk about so much about the struggles in science and how science is actually, how world is making science happen. And it's really ugly. And including, scientists' salaries in Japan, I don't know if you know, it's really bad. It's like a student salary in Europe. So there's so many problems in science right now. Sorry, I'm going on a rant. But IAU could potentially do something, but don't have that depth to do it right now. Yes, I was.
Wow, you noticed my hand raising really quickly. I'm wondering, I think in history a lot of exploration is motivated by kind of the capture of like wealth or, settlement, these kinds of things. How can you kind of motivate people to do space exploration if you tell them, okay, you're not going to be able to keep anything that you find, you're not going to be able to kind of claim any land? How can you kind of square those two things?
So, that's sort of the dilemma, because we already had that from the 60s space treaty saying nobody can claim for anything at all from space. But we have broken, most major space agencies broken that law, including JAXA. JAXA claimed for Ryugu samples. But the space treaty says you cannot claim it. And then, ESA, NASA, every space agency broke it. And these are the very, still space agencies are pretty small compared to a government, and then but it's almost like, so far until 2015 it was more like, oh, we are gonna take some samples from here and there for research, and no one actually questioned them because no sort of like mining happened. It's mostly focused on research, and the samples are really tiny compared to what you can do with it. But there are like parties who are concerned about bringing back these samples, introducing new microbes to Earth, and that's another story. But then 2015, the Senate passed the bill to completely change how you look at claiming things. So right now, I would say we need, like, rather than in a very friendly way of getting everyone together, maybe like strong sort of treaties saying you cannot do this at all. Sort of like how ceasefire works. If you sort of see one thing is actually there are only very few points that you can go to space, right? And because there's not so many even though there's many space agencies, rocket launch systems are very few. And right now, and most of the rockets are sent in Europe, and because NASA doesn't actively send rockets anymore. And I think that's the part you can also control, because number of rocket launch systems are really small. You could sort of control those ports, maybe. I don't know, I'm just thinking. But we had a treaty, nobody actually sort of practiced it, and no one even, we even forgot about it until 2015. I think I would say we should, that's why we should just scrap everything that exists and come up with new laws, but not from US. Like, has to be like a independent party. Hopefully, UN is only option right now. Not UN, the UN Office for Space, Outer Space. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much, Thilina.
Oh, last
sorry,
question.
last question. So I was wondering, like, is it really possible for this kind of peaceful, like, development and exploration when, like, for example, like when you explore new land and then you found gold or diamonds or any rare minerals, is it still possible to, explore it peacefully when you find something really valuable on another planet, and you found like the mining method is actually low cost? Is it still possible? And actually, my other concern is it still necessary? It may be a bit radical, sorry.
Hard, because so one thing is that as any rare material becomes really valuable, and that's one of the problems. Like, diamond. Why, I don't know why are we paying so much for this damn rock anyway?
I agree.
Right, so any rare materials becomes really expensive. Like, for example, even diamond, you have a price. And I had the pleasure to get a tiny grain from Ryugu asteroid, and so I had to go to JAXA, bring it back to our institute. So because of this travel back and forth, you need an insurance. But there's no insurance company exists on Earth that can insure materials outside of Earth. So technically it's 0 yen, but randomly I wrote 5,000 yen. But this tiny grain costs like millions and millions because it's rare. So the problem is anything that's rare can value really high. So for scientific reasons, I think things we find outside of Earth is really important. So because it gives us understanding of origin of solar system, origin of Earth, and origin of life, and origin of things at certain period in the history. And do we really need it? Yes, it helps. I mean, it helps us to sort of expand our scientific understanding, right? And that's what human curiosity is about. But the concern is that are we going to do it ethically? Probably no.
Yeah.
And that's the I mean, unfortunately, I don't have any answers today for this topic because nobody actually has any answers right now. So if you have the money, if you have the resources, you are at the top right now. Anyone can do it with that amount of money and resources.
Yeah, so my concern is like actually it's like in the future, like if we can find this kind of really precious and also high value on Earth, and of course like benefits always come first. It's not about peace.
Yeah.
So will there still be like peaceful?
I mean, I don't think so, because if you look at how we are extracting oil on Earth
Yeah.
and diamonds on Earth, I mean, none of these are done ethically at all.
Yes.
And I cannot imagine if we are not practicing ethically extracting on Earth, we are not going to practice it outside of Earth at all. At least on Earth, we can actually see how this is done in a really bad way. Outside of us, you can't even see how it's going to go.
So we have a couple announcements before. Yes. So we're Space Cafe Tokyo team, and thanks to good heavens here, we are having our event every month, several times a month, several years.
Once a month.
Here, so with a very good food and good drinks. So if you wanna have another drinks or food, please order here. And thank you, Hisako-san, for providing us this good place. They have also a Facebook page and Instagram, so if you wanna follow them. And also, there are a couple announcements of the event, the holiday event here. So they have a Christmas dinner, and also they have content party. So if you don't decided your plan for the holiday season, this is a very good choice for you.
So Christmas dinner has been booked out.
Oh, okay.
Oh.
Yeah. So for the content party. So the information should be also checked by these links. So this is Space Cafe Tokyo team. So Ken is keeping the door today, and also Thilina as well, and me and Mayuko, and Chase is our photographer. So we have a Facebook and Twitter, and also Meetup page, and also we have a YouTube channel right recently, and uploading our past event videos. So if you're interested in, please subscribe our channel. And also if you haven't already, please sign in from the QR code here. Okay, and also we have our sister event group called Nerd Night, and their event is, the next event of Nerd Night will be on March 15th, so next year. So we still have 3 months, but you can check their information from our meetup group or also their website. So Nerd Night have 2 or 3 speakers every event, and it's not only about space-related talks and every kind of nerd topic, so it should be very interesting for you. And also, our next event is not yet decided. We are finalizing the date, so we will be announced maybe very soon. What we can say right now is that next speaker will be a very big guest. So please stay tuned for our next event announcement. Okay, so this is the end of the event. So thank you so much for coming tonight.